upon returning from my training trip in China, as I mentioned earlier, my dad gave me more and more control over our martial arts school and the classes. As my personal training, initially I was focusing mostly on Yiquan and the variant of Baiyuan Tongbei that I learned from Zhang Xinbin 老师. I'll still be doing 1.5 hours of stance and then do thousands of single draws and power generations, etc. And eventually I started going to college, which I did graphic design. And some of you might or may not know, graphic design is actually quite a hard course. At least the college I went to was very, very hard. We had to spend hours and hours doing homework every day. And I still try to keep my training up, but that would mean that I have less time to spend running the school and doing classes, and also eventually participating in competition. I mean, first year was okay, but as it goes on to a second and third year, there's just more and more work keep piling up. And also, my interest has always been more on the knowledge side and training side of Chinese martial arts, rather than the vanity side of doing competition and winning medals. Frankly, to me, those don't really mean anything. I don't actually want to spend time on it unless I have to, which is why the moment my dad decided to go back to China because he didn't like South Africa anymore, I basically stopped going to competitions. I remember the last year, right? I think 2006, I still brought students to competition, but I didn't even take part in it. I just went there and checked it out and I left. I didn't even stay for the full event because I just have so much homework to do and assignment and project, and also my own training. So as time went on from there, I just have less and less time to run the school. So eventually, I stopped the classes altogether, and I had to just focus on schoolwork and my personal training. Up to some point, I basically hit a bottleneck with Yiquan. Not going to go into the technical side of it, but it's basically there's something fundamental that I was missing, and I realized it, but I don't know what is that I'm missing. And without getting that missing part, I cannot unify the top and bottom half of my powers into one unified strength. And because I was busy with school and I can't actually go back to China during that period, and it was quite frustrating to hit the bottleneck and can't progress, so I decided to just focus more on plum flower mantis. Because at the time I still think those two styles are equally good. So if any of you are wondering why I didn't just try to fuse mantis and Yiquan together, okay, firstly I was stuck with the Yiquan progression, and mantis is not going to actually help with that. And secondly, the two styles could not be any further apart from one another. They are not compatible together at all. Contrary to some popular belief, not all Chinese martial arts systems can be trained together, and they don't all complement each other. There are certain styles that can complement each other, and there are others that actually go in separate directions, and if you try to do both, you end up nowhere. So my issue was that I can't progress any further in Yiquan. I don't know, what the next step is, and whatever training I do, it doesn't seem to help anymore. So therefore, I decided to stop doing Yiquan and try to pursue the mantis branch, because to me, that's something that I hadn't fully explored. And according to Ma 老师, right, my mantis teacher, the path of progression is pretty clear. Which is why when Yiquan is not working out anymore and I couldn't go back to China to fix it, I decided to give mantis a try. And obviously, the moment I start focusing on platform mantis, the problem comes in that how do I generate power? Because as I said before, there's three essence, right? Speed, technique, and power. And mantis is a style that has good speed, great technique, at least I saw so at the time, but not enough power. So naturally, if I want to focus more on the mantis side of training, according to my mantis teacher, Ma 老师, I would then have to do iron hand. And that's when I started basically practicing iron hand. If you don't know, it's basically you put iron pebbles and various herbal medicine into a bag, put on a table, and you hit it with your hand in various different techniques. Depending on what lineage or martial art you do, you have different ways to hit the bag. And the idea is that as you condition your hand on these iron pellets, your hand will become harder and harder and harder. And eventually, your hand will be almost like iron. When you hit people, it's going to be really, really sore. Now, this concept is not unique to mantis. I basically had this training. I heard about this training even from my Shaobei days. Shaobei style is also very big on external conditioning. In fact, I have the shell-based recipe on the herbal medicine that you need to wash your hand after training every day. And that's a recipe that I went with. I basically asked friends from China to buy me a whole bunch of the recipe, enough herbal medicine to last me over 3 years. And I shipped it with a friend who basically at the time was doing a furniture business from China. They had whole cargo containers. And I basically got all the medicine here, and I started cooking them myself, preparing the medicines, and started doing iron hand training. Because that was the only way that I know how I'm going to be able to progress in menses and keep up the power. I spent over 2 years with various iron hand and iron arm training. But the more I trained, the more I realized that it is not what has been described in the scripture, right? Because according to the shell-based scripture, as well as the account of my mentis teacher, after training for 3 months, 100 days, that's like the first level, and then 3 years is the full completion of your training. So according to those scriptures, as your hand get harder and harder, it's supposed to be more destructive, right? Eventually you'll be able to hit somebody's arm and crack their bones. Anything you hit is gonna break. That's the kind of description of the result you should achieve from iron hand training. But after I've been doing it for over 2 years, I don't actually see that result. Yes, my hand are less susceptible to pain, but it doesn't actually get harder, okay? And when I hit things and people, they don't just break like it says in the scripture. Now, of course, some of you might think, maybe I didn't train properly, I didn't train enough, or I didn't use the right medicine, or whatever the reason is, or there's another better explanation. Basically, the scriptures were over-exaggerated, right? I mean, eventually, right, years later, I basically examined other people who have done iron hand training, and other than the demos where they actually, break bricks and stuff, we actually ask them to hit people, they don't actually have the same kind of destructive power. I'm going to go into details here. I'm probably going to make a video just explaining the fallacies of iron hand training at a later stage. So basically, the nutshell is the result that I got was not what I was expecting. But still, at the time, I was feeling that something's not right with this training. But I still kept going on because I didn't have anything better to do until I'm able to finish my study and go back to China again. And around some point during that time, I got sick. It was like winter, and I caught a flu. Now, according to the scripture, right, you have to train iron hands every day. And it is a common belief in the Chinese culture, Chinese martial art custom, that if you miss a day, then you're going to revert 3 days. And if you miss 3 days, you have to start from scratch. All right, it's a common misconception within Chinese martial arts society in China. It's actually not true. But at the time, I believe it to be true, so I didn't want to stop the training and have to start from the beginning, which is why even though I had fever and flu, I was still training iron hand. And I didn't know at the time that this is actually a very bad thing, because iron hand actually is quite damaging for your body, and therefore require your body to recover through proper sleep, and it requires a healthy body to be able to sustain the training. And naturally, when you are sick and you train, it makes your body even worse. So my flu and fever didn't fully recover. It basically goes on, off, on, off, on, off, and I just kept doing it because I didn't want to stop the training and I had to restart from the beginning. And after struggling with this flu for almost a month, I just got really, really worse. And eventually, I had to go to a doctor, and and the doctor said that if you still don't sleep the whole day and rest until you recover, you are gonna die from some kind of heart attack. And at the time, it was just not a common flu anymore. Actually, the flu I had has evolved into pneumonia, right, which is a lung infection. I was like coughing non-stop. Sometimes in the night I hardly can breathe. And that's when I basically had to stop my training and take a break until my body recovers again. Obviously, looking back, this was a pretty stupid thing to do, and my advice to anyone watching the video is that if you are sick or not feeling well, then skip that day of training. I mean, ideally you want to train every day, but skipping a day or 2 days or even 3 days is not going to revert your training back to zero. That concept in Chinese martial arts society is a misconception that is not actually true. But just gonna also give you an idea of how dedicated I am when it comes to doing training. Ever since from my China days, where I actually spent the full day, morning, afternoon, and evening in various teachers' classes to practice, to how I don't stop even though when I'm sick. Even until now, I spend 4 to 6 hours a day training. So whenever someone tells me that I don't train hard enough, or they train harder than me, I just laugh, because not saying that it's impossible that someone out there training harder than me, that most certainly is, but the chance of majority of the people that I meet saying they're training harder than me, that's very unlikely to be true, right? Unless you don't have a day job and you don't have to worry about living expense, and you actually can dedicate a large portion of your day training. Otherwise, I don't believe there are a lot of people out there who can train harder than me. And certainly not those that spend their time browsing through YouTube and criticizing my videos. And like I said in my last video, spending a lot of time into training doesn't always equal high-level results, and I've never claimed to represent a very high level of Chinese traditional martial art. However, the amount of time and dedication that I put into this field of research has enabled me to have more and better information than most people out there, especially those that have been criticizing my channels. And like I've also said before, you don't have to be a great director to be a film critic. You simply need to know enough about what you are talking about. And when it comes to Chinese martial art, I certainly do believe that I do know enough to talk about it and give criticism to others, even though some of these other guys like Chen Yaowang is far more famous and recognized than me, in the eyes of the government and the official channel. But it doesn't mean that I cannot have my own views and opinions on them, especially when those things are related to hard evidence and facts that I actually provided in the video. They're not just things I claim and make out of thin air. So after I recovered from my ammonia, my dad also heard that I was sick. He gave me a phone call. He says that he wanted me to go back to check on my body, because he doesn't trust Western medicine and Western doctors. He wanted me to go back and check a Chinese doctor. And I also saw that this will be a good opportunity to go back and fix up what I'm missing, right? I actually at the time don't want to do external conditioning, eye and hand training anymore. I rather want to fix up my missing part of my internal training. And around that same time is when I came across a video on the internet about an old Bagua grandmaster, right, Tian Fang. The video of him when he was 94 years old, doing really weird things to people that I couldn't comprehend. Before that, I understand Yi Quan quite well, and what internal power means, which is just body structure. But when I was watching Tian Fang's video, I realized that that can't be explained by pure body structure. There must be something else involved if it's true, and something that I completely have no idea of. So when my dad suggested that I should visit him in Beijing again, I thought that was a good idea and opportunity to fix up whatever I was lacking in Chinese martial art. So in 2008, the year that I actually held the Beijing Olympic, I went back to Beijing once again, seeking for further knowledge in Chinese traditional martial art. And this time, I have a much more clearer goal. Instead of checking everybody out and trying out everything, I just want to find out about this internal power. Now, I went back around July, which is around the time when Olympic was going to start off. So China was Beijing, right, particularly was very hectic. Everyone is busy, the security everywhere, police patrolling every corner of the streets. And a lot of the functions, in and out of the city were on lockdown. So the first thing I did was I contacted a lot of my old friends from back in 2003, check out what they are doing, and trying to get some hands on any internal masters that they know of. And naturally, the first person that I called up was my best friend Rene, who didn't actually leave China after he studied in Beijing. Instead, he found a job locally so that he can remain in Beijing and further his studies in Chinese martial art. So I called him up, and coincidentally enough, at that time he was busy with a Chinese martial art summer camp that was held in Beijing. Basically, his master from Europe, Shifu Mike Matelos, and organized his students and other interested parties to basically travel to China and spend, I think, either 10 days or 2 weeks or so in Longquan Shanzhuang, which is a hotel just outside Beijing, and then throughout every day, they will invite different masters to come and give different seminars in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And my father was also invited to be there to offer a seminar on Shaobei. So I basically traveled with my father to Longquan Shanzhuang. And that's where I got to meet Rene after many years. And also the first time I got to meet his master, Shifu Mike Matelos. And here's a quick photo of my dad basically having a seminar at the summer camp teaching the students Northern Shaolin or Shaobei Quan. And the person standing next to him doing the translation is my good friend Rene. Obviously during the summer camp everyone is always very busy, so I didn't have a lot of time to chat with them. Instead I just I was around observing the different classes and checking out different masters that were offering classes there. And every day after the seminar, we'll basically get together in a restaurant close by and and have lunch or dinner together with all the masters that were there at that day. So through this, I got to meet a couple of new masters that I've never known before, as well as some masters that I've known from back in the day, such as Xu Shixi 老师 that does the Chen style and Yin style Bagua, and Zhang Xinbin, who was teaching Baiyan Tongbei at the summer camp. So once I met with Zhang Xinbin at the event, I decided that I should resume my training under him. While I'm looking for an internal master, because at the meantime I still need to do some training. So during the day I'll be searching for internal masters, but in the evening I'll basically go to where his place is and and do Baiyan Tongbei training under him. So once the summer camp was over, where everything's quiet down a bit, basically Rene invited me over to his apartment, and that's where I got to properly meet with his master, Shifu Mike Matelos, who I assume some of you might already know. He's quite recognized in the European Chinese martial arts scene, right? I think he started in Germany and he formed the Zhenwu Chinese Martial Arts Association, and then gradually it has branches in other parts of Europe as well. It's quite a successful organization. So from what I remember, he first started off with boxing when he was a kid, and then he did some Southern style, and eventually he decided to move to Taiwan to further his study in Chinese martial arts. First he went to, I think, a branch of Wutang, where he did 8-step mantas and some Xingyi and Bagua stuff, and during his years studying there, he eventually was introduced to a very high-level Tai Chi master in Taiwan called Master Wang Jie. And upon meeting him, he realized that this will be his, master for the rest of his life, and he did mantas, 越加散手, which is like kind of joint locking techniques, and mainly he did a version of Yang style Tai Chi under Master Wang Jie. So during a few days, I was able to spend with Shifu Mike and Rene and some of his students. We all cramped up in Rene's apartment, which was quite funny at the time. And I was able to ask him a lot of questions that I have about internal martial art, and he was able to show me some stuff, but it didn't quite make sense to me completely at the time. Years later, when I reflect upon what he told me at the time, it made a lot more sense. Unfortunately, at that moment, when I met with him, my understanding of internal martial art is next to nothing, so I couldn't really appreciate the knowledge that he was explaining to me. But what I did realize was that he was quite well trained in the internal martial arts structure and power, and he's hands down the best foreign internal practitioner that I've ever come across in my journey in martial arts. Now I'm not saying that there are no other foreign practitioners who are better than him. That is possible, I don't know. But out of everyone that I've seen and met, Shifu Mike Matelos is basically the highest level of internal practitioner that I've come across. So besides discussing internal martial art with him, I also went on trips with him to basically visit various traditional Chinese martial art masters around Beijing that he has ties and associations with. So a lot of masters that we visited, I'm not going to mention all of them. In one particular instance, we went to this master called Sun Ruxian. So basically he practiced all kind of martial arts, including Shaolin, 五行八法拳. He also does Cheng style Bagua, Chinese wrestling, 6 harmony mantas, etc. I'm mentioning him in particular because I'm gonna refer to him again at a later stage in this video. So we went to his house. Shifu Mike was discussing. He was also one of the instructors at the summer camp, so they were talking about the next year we're gonna have a training camp in Europe. The traveling and all of that. And then they also naturally would start talking about Chinese martial art. And he basically called Renee up to basically demonstrate some of the stuff that they were discussing. And and I was interested in checking out this master because at the time I was looking for a genuine internal master. But what I realized, the issue with this particular master, Sun Lao Shi, as well as many others that I did come across, is that whatever they demonstrate hinges largely on their body size. He is a fairly tall and a pretty big and strong person, and Renee is relatively shorter and slimmer. So naturally, the stuff that he does, he easily can overpower Renee. And when he is explaining how he does it, he basically says, you just relax, and then you just you don't think about it, and then you just move, and the guy would fall out or move with you, etc. Which might sound like is viable, but when you actually try to do that according to his instruction, it will not work. Unless you're also that big versus someone that is much smaller. And this is a common problem in internal Chinese martial arts, that people cannot quantify their knowledge and and deduce it and reduce it into mechanics, right? They don't know exactly why or what is enabling them to do certain things, and instead they tell you their own impression or their own feeling, which often does not translate to the same result when taught to someone else. So after observing him and Sifu Mike talking about stuff and showing stuff on Renee and some of the other members of the summer camp that went with us, I decided this is not the master I'm looking for, and I need to look elsewhere. And this is pretty much the case with all the other masters that we visited during that period of time. Now, at the time, if Shifu Mike was actually permanently staying in Beijing, then I might actually consider learning under him. But unfortunately, he only had a few more days left in Beijing, and then he had to go back to Europe. So naturally, that leaves me, with no other option other than keep on looking for a genuine internal master. Another person that I got to meet through Sifu Mike was a friend named Kim. I think his surname is Buckland. I'm not 100% sure. I'm pretty bad with names, if you haven't realized. So basically, he also came to the summer camp, and afterwards he didn't go back to Europe. He was originally from Norway, and instead he basically stayed in Beijing and applied for a student visa, and so that he can spend time learning from other masters. I believe at the time he was doing Chinese wrestling with Sun Ruxian Lao Shi, and was doing Baiyan Tongbei with Zhang Xinbin Lao Shi. So naturally, every time I train with Zhang Xinbin, I'll basically run into him. And when I have time, also basically show him around in Beijing, because that's his first time in Beijing. And we'll basically, I'll show him where to buy stuff, and sometimes occasionally we'll, go clubbing together in the evening. Here's a selfie that we took just before I left Beijing. And this is, long before selfie was even a thing. We took it because we just didn't have someone else to take the picture for us. And I haven't met him since I left Beijing in 2008. But lastly, I heard he was actually running a division of the Zhenwu Chinese Martial Arts Association, I believe, in Prague. He's the head of the division in Prague, and he's doing quite well for himself, as far as I know. Mainly teaching Baiyan Tongbei from Zhang Xinbin. Once Renee's master, Shifu Mike, left Beijing and went back to Europe, things started to quiet down a bit. That's when I told Renee about the video that I saw on YouTube regarding this old Bagua master in Beijing. And I told him about it, and I said, I want to meet this old Bagua master called Tian Fang. And then he told me, well, he actually knows the chairman of the Bagua Association in Beijing, and he will basically go, ask if they know where this old master is. And a day later, he got back to me. He said he found the master, and he found someone who was willing to take us and make introductions. And then basically, I went with Renee to meet this old Bagua Grandmaster Tian Fang. I've talked about this in my other videos, so I'm here not going to go into detail. Basically, in short, he was very impressive. He had abilities that I couldn't comprehend at the time. He could affect me in ways that it didn't make sense to me. But the stuff in his video where he made people jump and stuff, it didn't happen to me. At the time, I still wanted to learn from him because there was still stuff that I couldn't understand. But he was too old, so his caretaker said that no, you can't learn from him. He's too old. And I was quite disappointed, but that just means that I had to keep on with my journey to search for internal understanding. So after that, I basically went and looked for other sources, including people from the Wang Yongquan Tai Chi lineage, such as Zhu Chunxuan, Grandmaster Zhu Chunxuan, as well as others like Zhu Datong, right? He's from the Wu Tunan lineage of Tai Chi, as well as many others. I managed to visit quite a few of them. For example, the one morning I went to look for Master Zhu Chunxuan at Gongti Dongmen, right, which is the eastern gate of the Workers' Stadium in Beijing. That's where he trains and teaches people. But unfortunately, the day that I went there, he wasn't there. I met some other people that were part of the Wang Yongquan lineage of Tai Chi. And and I basically experienced what they do, and it wasn't impressive. They didn't quite be able to affect me, and didn't feel as good as what Grandmaster Tianfang was able to show me. So I thought maybe I'd come back another day, and maybe Zhu Chunxuan was better. But then as things progressed on, I just never got the opportunity to go back to basically find Zhu Chunxuan. And many of the other internal masters that people told me about or heard about, they either also couldn't really affect me, or they basically are doing stuff that is a trickery that they don't tell people about, and actually that's not what I'm looking for, right? I went back to look for genuine, authentic internal power. Eventually, I felt a bit lost, so I went on to Wushu Web again, right? That largest Chinese martial art forum in China at the time. And I basically made a post and asked, I said, I'm looking for internal power, particularly in Tai Chi. So does anyone know any good recommendations? I got a bunch of rubbish reply, like you got to go to Wudang Mountain, you got to find some Taoist priest, you got to do this, got to do that. All dumb trash. One person privately messaged me. He didn't reply to my post. He privately messaged me and says that if he were me and he was in Beijing, he will go to the Pearl Bamboo Park and look for either Da Zhang or Xiao Zhang. Either one of them would do. And this person obviously sounds like he knows what he's saying. So I basically took his advice, asked him, where in the Pearl Bamboo Park and what time should I go. I got all the information down. And then the next morning, I went to the Pearl Bamboo Park around 8 o'clock in the morning. I went to the Ba Yixuan, which is a pavilion on almost like an island in the middle of the lake. And basically, there was a lot of people there. I look around, and I found this one particular person who looked like he's a master. He wasn't actually teaching at the time. He was just sitting around chatting with people. So I went to him and I said, hi, are you either Da Zhang or Xiao Zhang? And then he looked at me very funny, and he's like, who's asking? I said, look, right, I'm a martial art enthusiast. I came from South Africa all the way to Beijing. I'm looking for Tai Chi, authentic Tai Chi knowledge. And then after that, he said, okay, well, I'm Xiao Zhang. So I told, and he asked me how I got to know about him. So I told him, someone on the internet referred me to him, and I really want to learn Tai Chi. And then he said, okay, well, come next day, go stand there, and let's see if you can stand properly. So I came back again the next day. He wasn't there. I stood in the corner. I basically didn't move. I don't know how long it was, an hour or 2 hours, I can't remember. I just kept standing there until someone came behind me and said, okay, I see you got patience, but your stance is incorrect. So then Xiao Zhang Lao Shi at the time basically corrected me on how to stand properly. And then I basically have to do 3 sessions of stance a day. Each session lasts 40 minutes. And basically every week I got to add on a minute and eventually reach 2 hours per session. And how many sessions you do is up to you. And that's how I basically started training with my Tai Chi, who eventually became my Tai Chi master. At the same time, in the evening, I was also still training with Zhang Xinbin Lao Shi, right, that Baiyan Tongbei teacher that I met back in 2003. Because I thought, because in this Tai Chi lineage, right, we only do stance and we do nothing else at the time, which is not very practical to begin with. I trust my Tai Chi master that this will eventually lead to something, but at that time, I just felt like I needed something else to do as well, other than just standing there all day, which is why I still carry on my training with Baiyan Tongbei, the strange version where they focus on power generation. So initially, I had to actually take a leap of faith because unlike the other internal people that I came across in other parks, where they are already doing stuff with each other, which is kind of makes it natural for me to go up and say, hey, can I experience what you did to him? I want to feel, what that feels like. It's kind of an easy way to get into experiencing. When I went to my then, Tai Chi teacher or Zhang Laoshi's training place, everyone was just doing Wuji stance. And and Zhang Laoshi, my current Tai Chi master, but then he's only my teacher. He was just sitting there sipping tea and then looking at the students training. So it became kind of awkward to just come out of the blue and ask hey, can you do something to me so I can feel your power. And the other thing is he wasn't very keen on taking any new students. So I was afraid that if I just come out of the blue and ask about that, he might just tell me to get the hell out. Which is why to decide to train under him was kind of a leap of faith. And I made this decision because firstly, the guy who recommended me to go to him, he seemed to really know who's who and what's what within the Beijing's internal martial arts circle, especially for Tai Chi. So I kind of trust him, even though I've never met him in person, but his knowledge seemed legit, so I do trust his recommendation. And the second reason is that Zhang Laoshi is a disciple of Grandmaster Shiming, whom I heard a lot of good things from my dad during his days mingling with Beijing's Chinese martial art community. I actually have an entire 3-part video, fact or fiction, on my Grandmaster Shiming, so you can check that out if you haven't, where I go through the details of my father's stories regarding Grandmaster Shiming. But suffice to say, he has a lot of good things to say about Grandmaster Shiming, and and this Zhang Laoshi was the disciple of Shiming, and therefore I assume he must have genuine knowledge and skill. And lastly, quite frankly, I was running out of options by then. All the people that I had on the list that people recommended, I visited them all, and none of them really panned out. So this was almost my last option at the time. So I had no other better option, therefore I decided to just stick around and see what's what. It was after, I think, at least 2 weeks that one afternoon, where there was only 2 of us training there with Zhang Laoshi, that he was in a happy mood and he decided to show us something about skeletal force. So he basically asked each of us to take turns and grab his wrist and try to pin him to the spot. And then he was able to effortlessly overpower my force and structure and move his 2 arms freely, left, right, and center. I would just fall left, fall right, fall forward, and fall back. I could not hold his wrist in place at all. Now the feeling that I got at the time was very similar to how I felt when I was training with my Yiquan teacher back in 2003. However, the difference is my Yiquan teacher, as well as Zhang Xinbin, who I learned the power generation version of Bai Tong Bei from, they both require a specific stance, meaning that their leg had to be in a certain rooted stance, their body in a certain structure, their hand was Yiquan like this, or Bai Tong Bei, he had a different position, but it had to be in a specific shape for them to generate the structural force. But my Tai Chi teacher at the time, he was just casually standing there in a Wuji stance, For those of you that don't know, it's basically having your feet shoulderwards and your leg hardly bent at all. It's a very casual stance, and his arm was basically just doing whatever. It wasn't a particular structure that he invokes in order to generate this kind of power. And that to me at the time was very mind-blowing because, from my Yiquan training, I always saw that, internal power comes from a specific structure. But what, my Tai Chi teacher at the time showed me was that he was able to produce the same result without relying on any specific structure. He can do whatever he wants with the body, and the force is all the same. So keep in mind that my Yiquan teacher is about similar height to me, maybe a little shorter, and weighs about the same as well. I might be a little heavier than him at the time. Whereas in comparison, my Tai Chi teacher at the time, or my current Tai Chi master, he's a lot shorter than me and a lot lighter. So for him to be able to overpower me so easily, without any struggle and without using any stance or particular structure, that to me communicates a higher level or more refined understanding to internal structure than what I was learning from my Yiquan teacher back in 2003. And at that very moment, I've realized, I told myself that I have found the correct teacher, and I shall remain with him and train under him for as long as it takes to gain the ability and knowledge that he possesses. And for those of you that actually, cares about vanity and titles, it's true that my Tai Chi master is not as well connected in the government as people say like Chen Xiaowang. So naturally, he was not voted top 5 or top 10 master out of China according to the government. However, my master has a lot of respect and reputation and street cred within the Tai Chi community in Beijing, which for anyone who is a truly practitioner of traditional martial arts, this should mean more to them than government-given titles and recognition. And in contrast, most of those that has recognition from the government and was given big titles, they are not respected within the Chinese martial art community at all. Now this is very hard for foreigners to understand because the only source of information that you have are usually media, internet, and advertisement from the government, and they paint you a completely different picture to what actually is going on in the Chinese martial art community. So unless you actually spend sufficient amount of time living and mingling with the actual traditional martial art community within China, different city, Beijing or wherever else, you will not have the real picture of who's who and what's what. And more often than not, the people that command the most respect and reputation and street cred within the actual community are names that you have never even heard of on the internet through media or government propaganda. And if you really must know, my Tai Chi master was the vice chairman of the Wutunan Tai Chi Association in Beijing. Although he didn't really like the title, nor that he liked the responsibilities that came with it, so after he was basically forced to take the position by his Tai Chi brothers from the Wutunan lineage. And after his term was over, he basically refused to be re-elected, and he didn't want to be associated with any association, right? He is a very free spirit. All he cares about is teaching students and doing whatever else he likes to do. He has no desire to make money or to get reputation within the martial art community. He simply just practices and he teaches, and that's it. And as for the Grandmaster Shiming's lineage of Tai Chi, there are no association, and ever since Grandmaster passed away, all his disciples are just did their own thing. So naturally there is no association, and therefore there are no titles to be given. But for anyone who knows what's going on within that circle, they all know that my master is one of the most recognized and top disciples of Grandmaster Shiming. And back in the days, Grandmaster Shiming was one of the most recognized Tai Chi masters in the entire Beijing. Again, I've talked about this extensively in my other videos, I'm not going to go into details here. But these are all names that has a lot of street cred and command a lot of reputation within the actual martial arts circle, rather than the government circle of propaganda and advertisement. Now you can also think about this for a moment and ask yourself this question. I do happen to know quite a number of high-profile masters promoted by the government as top masters in the country. Now how come after nearly 20 years of searching for better knowledge in Chinese martial arts, I did not go to any of those, instead I settled for a master that's completely unknown to the public and not recognized by the government at all? And in this regard, I do feel sad for those of you out there that are choosing masters based on what you read in a brochure rather than what's actually going on under the hood, so to speak, if we're using a car analogy. And while this is sad, it is also completely understandable, because if you do not have enough knowledge to differentiate between legitimate internal martial arts skill and those that are not, then there are no way for you to differentiate between a good master, legitimate master, from a skill perspective than one that is not that legit or not good. And therefore, all you can work on is reputation from the government, which unfortunately are not trustworthy in this kind of scenario. And then here are some more photos taken with my Tai Chi teacher in 2008, where I literally spent every single day training at the Purple Bamboo Park. I even refused to meet with relatives for lunch or dinner if it meant to interfere with my training schedule. So through that 4 months period, I basically dedicated once I met my Tai Chi master, that is, I basically dedicated every single day I had to go to the park and complete my training session of the day under him. Everything else will either have to wait or be cancelled. And here is a photo taken with my Tai Chi brother, Guo Jian. And then here's a picture I took of my Tai Chi brother Beijing, who was also featured on one of my videos on my channel. And between them and Zhang Wei, they are basically three of the most important disciples under my master. And they're also three of the closest Tai Chi brothers for me in the entire system. Basically, when I go back to China, if I'm not spending time with my Tai Chi master, I'm spending time with one of these three brothers, and through them I'll be able to catch up on the stuff that I was missing when I'm not there. I spent just over 4 months in Beijing this time around in 2008, and then was forced to come back to South Africa to finish my thesis and then start looking for work. Now, while 4 months is not exactly a lot of time, but I did at the time felt that I took my first official step into real internal martial art training, so I was quite happy at the time. Unfortunately, like I just said, 4 months isn't a lot of time and isn't enough for me to grasp the actual fundamental aspect of training when it comes to our lineage of Tai Chi, which is actually probably harder than other lineages and variant of Tai Chi for distance and soft training. Because unlike other lineage of Tai Chi where they actually have motional exercises, in our lineage we do nothing but Wuji stance, and without motion and exercises that require movement, it's very hard to judge or measure oneself whether you are doing it correctly or not. Traditionally, it requires the teacher to check the student on a constant basis. So almost every day when you go to the teacher for training, he will check your various parts of your body to see if you're doing correctly, and then he will use other means to check whether you made a physical side such as your Yi and later on your Shen is in the correct state. And these are all things that initially you cannot check on your own, but you just have no idea what is right and what is wrong and how to measure yourself with. So while I still trained very diligently every day when I came back from my trip in 2008, as time went on, the training just became harder and more confusing to progress, right? It's almost like you're sailing and getting lost at sea without proper compass and direction. You have no idea where you're going or where you should go. Even so, I still kept at it for as long as I could. So around that time is when when I graduated and I started doing graphic design almost full time, and then that kind of also interfered with training. Initially, it kind of okay, but the moment you kind of get into the job, you realize that graphic design. I don't know about other industry, but graphic design is a very, very time-demanding industry. You basically have no 9 to 5 hours. You basically work until the project is done, and there's always something else that comes up at the last minute before the deadline that you have to rush. In the beginning, I was still able to keep my training, but as time went on, I just couldn't keep it up, and there was too much work. Also, the fact that I don't really know if I'm doing correctly the stance and everything, so eventually kind of got led astray. And slowly I just began to spend less and less time. Eventually, I just stopped training and focused just on working, design, and digital illustration. During this period, I was still able to go back to China once every second year, but due to work reason, I was only able to stay for 1 or 2 weeks at most, which didn't exactly help with my training because that is quite frankly too short a period to gain any meaningful improvement or progression. And as soon as I come back to South Africa, I get lost in my work again, and I would keep doing training, but then eventually, I kind of get lost in my work and then stop training again. So this carried on until I hit the age of 30, right? In Chinese, there's a saying that goes 30而立, which roughly translates to when you reach the age of 30, you need to know exactly what you want in life. So during that year, I started to ask myself, what exactly do I want to achieve in life? And I imagine, if I reach 60, 70, or 80, basically the day I'm about to die, and I reflect back on my life, what would I be proud of? Would I be happy that I'm a pretty decent designer? And the answer is no, I wouldn't be happy about that. Instead, I realized that I will really be happy about my life at my dying breath if I really understood internal Chinese martial art and was a quite accomplished Chinese martial art practitioner. So at that moment, I realized that, I've been wasting the past few years pursuing something that is not the real passion of my life. And from that moment onwards, I decided that I really need to rework my life, and hence I quit my full-time job so that I can actually have more time to train and more flexible schedule so that I can actually go back to China every year and train for a prolonged period of time. Because as you know, if you're working for a company full-time, no boss in the world is going to give you 3 months off every year, right? That's just impossible. So in order to do that, I had to work freelance. And 3 months is basically the minimum period that one need to actually have any meaningful progression. Because you need to go back, correct the mistake you made for that period of time you're not there, consolidate those mistakes corrected, and then learn something new and further your progression. So in order to do that, you need at least 3 months. Another thing that got me thinking at the time was that I suddenly remember that when I met with my Yiquan teacher, right, back in 2003, he was just hitting his 30s, and compared to his ability in his 30s and what I was at in my 30s, I was leagues behind his skill level, which also kind of made me sad and depressed, because that just means that from when I met him up to when I hit 30, I basically actually wasted most of my time. And that became another motivation for me to realize that I definitely need to restructure my life and focus on doing Chinese traditional martial art training. And what's even sadder is that when I met him in his 30s, he wasn't even reaching a high level of internal power. He has very strong structure, but he isn't getting deeper into the internal aspect of internal training. And while I have a Tai Chi teacher that has a deeper knowledge on internal structure and power, I wasted all these years, and as a result, when I hit 30, I was a lot worse than my Yiquan teacher, even when it comes to just basic structural power, and never mind the internal aspect of Tai Chi. And this became another extra source of motivation for me to re-look at my life, restructure my life, so that I can actually focus on what really matters to myself. Another thing that I realized at the time is when I look back into my journey in Chinese martial arts, I basically spent a lot of time trying out all kinds of different styles and checking out what everybody was doing. While that gave me a very good overall knowledge on all the branches and styles of Chinese martial arts, and so I kind of knows what's what and who's who, it also kind of limited my actual progression deeper into Chinese martial art. For example, my Yiquan teacher, he only ever did Yiquan and nothing else, and as a result, when he's 30, he was far superior in terms of ability than what I was able to do, because I spent the same amount of years, well, besides the years I spent working, right? The other years, I spent scattered around different masters, trying out different things, so the result became watered down rather than focusing on one thing. Which is also why at that time, I made the decision that I'm not going to be distracted with other styles anymore. I'm just going to focus on this lineage of Tai Chi and nothing else. So the year 2014 was a special year for me, because that year is when my Tai Chi teacher reached his 60th birthday, and according to the custom of our lineage, he only accepts disciples once in his lifetime at the age of 60, right? Before that, we're all just his student and he's our teacher. This relationship only becomes master and disciple during his 60th birthday. Which is why that year, he told everyone, and he asked one of the Tai Chi brothers to also call me and tell me about it, that he's going to have an official 拜师 ceremony, where everyone who is interested can officially become his disciple. And this is coincidentally just the year after I decided that I need to make change in my life. So naturally, after sorting out everything on this side, I took a trip back to China to participate in this 拜师 ceremony. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances and complicated matters, my master couldn't hold the 拜师 ceremony officially during the months that I was there, and it was postponed to the following year. But unfortunately, my schedule can't let me stay to the next year, and therefore we had a private 拜师 ceremony among ourselves. So here you can see pictures taken on the day of our 拜师 ceremony, where it's just my master, me, and my two closest Tai Chi brothers who act as witnesses. It was a very simple ceremony, nothing glamorous or grandeur or official, but for me, that all matters is that I'm now an official disciple of my master, And I don't really care about any of the vanity stuff that other people associate with special ceremony. So that trip was the first trip since I met my Tai Chi master that I actually finally started to grasp what it is that I was actually supposed to train when I was doing Wuji stance. So it was the first major progression I was able to make within our lineage of Tai Chi training.